This is a blacksmith's knife, and I'm gonna try and turn this bolt into a blacksmithing knife. When I tried to cut this with the angle grinder, it destroyed all of the wheels, so I'm hoping that's a good sign that it's like a tough metal, but I really have no idea what I'm talking about. So let's see how this thing forges. I don't really know if you're supposed to forge bolts, but I just did it anyways. Look at that, that galvanized steel is like burning off. That neon green stuff is probably cancerous and toxic, so I just tried not to breathe it in. This was my 4th time forging out a knife, so I was starting to get the hang of bending the metal the way I wanted it to. The day I was forging this, it was about 98 degrees outside, so I was sweating so much, and the hot forge was right in front of me. I almost like passed out from the heat, but thankfully I didn't. The most tedious part of this project was thinning out the handle, because for a blacksmith's knife, you need the handle to be super thin so that you can bend it over. And that took a long time because that was a pretty thick bolt from before. Alright, this thing is a little bit too long, so I need to cut it about right here, and then I'll continue thinning it out so that I can bend it over. Unfortunately, I don't have power by my tiny home yet, so I had to walk all the way to the garage so that I could cut off that extra piece of metal. Then after that, it was back into the forge and more thinning out. At this point, I was getting pretty excited because I could see the end result coming. I could see the blade starting to take a final shape, but there was still work to do. The handle still needed a lot more thinning. Thankfully, most of it was over and I could swap over to my smaller hammer where I could work on the finer details. Then finally, I had a change of pace and I could start bending over the handle, and finally, starting that signature curve of a blacksmithing knife. I'm really new to forging, so I really don't know how to bend the metal properly. I've watched videos, but I still have no idea what I'm doing. This is a new anvil, and I picked it out because it had a large horn, and in this project, it came in really handy. I was able to bend the metal relatively easy. Easy? How do you say that? One thing that kept happening was the handle kept trying to coil up when I bent it over the horn, so it was back and forth in between the horn of the anvil and flattening it out. Because it was my first time doing any fancy curves like this, it did take me a while, and I also used a pair of pliers to get the curve that I wanted. Alright, this thing is all set, and now I'm going to do 3 normalizing cycles. I don't really know a whole lot about bladesmithing, but from what I've heard, normalizing just gets the blade ready for quenching. So what you do is heat the blade up to about 1500 degrees and just let it sit until it reaches room temperature. Because I'm impatient, I tried blowing on it, which did absolutely nothing. After that, it was back in the forge for another normalizing cycle. And after the 3rd and final normalizing cycle, the blade was finally ready to quench. I'm going to be using motor oil to quench instead because I ran out of canola oil. Looks good to me. There was a slight warp in the blade, so I had to hammer it out while it was still on fire. I'm gonna rinse it off real quick. The blade is all set, it's been heat treated, it's been tempered. Now it's just time to grind away the material and finish this thing up. Got a bunch of new sanding belts, gotta test these things out. I started off by using 120 grit sandpaper to get away most of the material, and it actually works really well. To add a little bit of shine to the blade, I hand sanded for the rest of it. And then I switched over to the sharpening stone, where I honed in the edge. And with that final step, my blade was completed, and I could start testing it out. And it actually worked really well against this board. It shaved off pieces of it like nothing. Alright, will this thing cut? Clean. We don't talk about that.
It will cut.
And with a little bit of hard work and elbow grease, I had myself a completed blacksmith's knife.